welcome back. Let's mix it up on the day's other headlines. A full disclosure fight over money is free speech, and the RNC embracing controversial blogger Andrew Breitbart for some fundraising in L.A. But we begin with breaking news from the Senate about the fight for transparency in political campaigns and money. Ever wonder who's bankrolling all those ads that crop up around election time? You, my friend, are not alone. And as it stands now, you're not entitled to much in the way of an explanation when those commercials populate your screen. That's because not a single Senate Republican voted today for the so-called Disclose Act. The measure was meant to button up the campaign finance reform loopholes opened by Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruling that effectively opened the floodgates for spending. As the Disclose Act's name implies, it would have forced the people or groups behind a given political ad to simply disclose their identity. In other words, say whatever you want to say, spend as much as you want to spend, but then you have to stand by it and disclose who you are. It's pretty rational, right? No. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer of New York not giving up despite today's defeat. He's the one proposing or sort of championing the bill in the Senate. As for President Obama, he says it's pretty much common sense.
You'd think that reducing corporate and even foreign influence over our elections would not be a partisan issue. But, of course, this is Washington in 2010.
And indeed, the Disclose Act crashed and burned in the Senate. Bottom line is supporting a principle as simple as transparency, where money has run rampant and clearly has corrupted the entire political process. Is it that hard? I guess it is. Anyway, we're joined now by Alicia Menendez, New Democrat Network Senior Advisor, along with conservative blogger Liz Mair. Liz, your thoughts on the vote?
Well, I guess I would start by saying that I wish it were as simple as this act being intended to deal with disclosure and transparency. Certainly there are some people who would have an issue with it still, were that the case. But there are some very real problems with this bill in terms of restriction of First Amendment rights and actual impeding upon that. And I think that if those things were carved out...
Specifically, what are the biggest problems that you see?
You have restrictions being placed on the ability of companies that actually have government contracts doing political advertising and engaging in advocacy. That's a problem. I think that other problems that people see with the legislation beyond the First Amendment issue include the fact that unions get slightly different treatment than corporations. That's something that Republicans have taken real issue with, and at the end of the day, this has become a very partisan issue. And I think that given that we are in an election cycle and we are very close to a major midterm election, clearly there's going to be a lot of partisanship anyway. But this legislation is not as clear-cut as I think a lot of the people pushing it would like to pretend.
The other thing that I noticed, Liz, not only do the unions potentially get different treatment, but also the NRA is exempted, as is the AARP.
That's right.
I didn't notice the Republicans objecting to that, quite honestly. I noticed the not that you're a Republican. It just struck me as curious that the NRA was being exempted and the AARP being exempted is okay, but the unions having an issue. I mean, at the end of the day, Alicia, are we nitpicking at something that is preposterous that we even have to debate the need to disclose who's spending money to try to manipulate our government?
Yeah, I'm in agreement there. And, you always talk about sort of an educated consumer. I think we also need an educated voter. In this case, this should have passed when you have foreign governments spending $300 million in an American election. That's preposterous. So I think then the responsibility becomes that of the American voter to sit and watch these ads and ask critical questions. Who spent the money to put this up? What's the purpose? What's the message? That's a big onus to put on the American people, and that's why I think Democrats are trying to push for transparency here. It's frustrating because it's just another example of Republicans shooting something down that's pretty middle of the road, pretty agreeable.
All right. Speaking of Republicans, the GOP establishment deciding to double down on Andrew Breitbart recently, the controversial blogger, the headliner at an RNC fundraiser in Beverly Hills next month. He'll be rubbing elbows with the Republican elite, including Michael Steele at the very glitzy Beverly Wilshire Hotel. The Republicans embracing Breitbart despite his central role in the Shirley Sherrod fiasco, circulating a video under accusations that it was edited in a misleading fashion in order to misconstrue her comments on race. That coming a year after Breitbart's similar role, or accused similar role, in the Acorn controversy. Last week, even our friends at Fox News apologized after relying on some of Breitbart's reporting. Should he really be part of the Republicans' public image now? Is Breitbart himself misunderstood, as certainly he would argue? Liz, your thoughts on sort of the activities of not only Breitbart, but people like him, sort of super activists, if you will. Some will say full-on manipulators, and I'm sure it's in the eye of the beholder on this one, but politically, if you're the GOP, your view on proximity to or distance from Mr. Breitbart.
I think that there are some issues with what was put out in terms of the charade tape. I mean, personally, my biggest one is that ultimately it seems to have caused her firing or her first resignation when, frankly, it doesn't sound like the administration did anything to really look into the matter, and that's a very serious consideration. That's something that I think there's wide agreement about. But as far as Andrew Breitbart is concerned, you know, there are a lot of controversial figures who are involved in politics and who raise money for candidates and for political parties and who donate to them. On the Democratic side of things, Oliver Stone is obviously a prominent example. You know, we've had a situation this week where he's been critiqued for making comments about the need to sort of depict and portray Hitler in context. This is somebody who has donated to Barack Obama. This is somebody who's donated to John Edwards. This is somebody who's donated to my Senator Jim Webb. You know, this is the situation in American politics. Everybody gets to have a say. We live in a democracy. People are involved in politics. And at the end of the day, if Andrew Breitbart is controversial, I think you can find plenty of people on the other side of the aisle who are too.
Yeah, no, I don't even disagree with that. Basically, you're saying it's all, there's weasels everywhere. The only thing I take issue with was your characterization of this country as a democracy, when clearly it's not representational of anybody other than a few rich people on both sides that are manipulating our government. But go ahead, Alicia. Do you think Oliver Stone and Andrew Breitbart are comparable political lightning rods?
No, I don't. And especially given sort of the timeliness of this and the moral ugliness of what Breitbart did, I am shocked that anyone would want to associate their brand with his brand. You know, up until this point, there's been a lot of discussion about racism, conflicts in the Tea Party. And up until this point, Republicans have been able to say, you know, they're the far right. We are a party of inclusion, and this really, I think, draws into question when the RNC is willing to raise money on the back of a race baiter. More to the point, I think this, you know, is part of a larger thing we're seeing in the Republican Party. Joe Wilson, Andrew Breitbart are allowed to say ridiculous things, unforgivable things. They don't apologize, and then they're forgiven and hailed as a hero. And I just don't think that's the type of party that Americans want to see in power.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. It's just my problem is I'm not sure that the Democrats are much better. You may not want the Republicans, but you know, both of the prom dates these days it may not be worth going to the prom. You know what I'm saying? Nice to talk to both of you. Thank you, guys.